to my right we have Abigail Tartman. Do you want to hold up your book? This is Dead Girls by Abigail Tartman, and it's her third novel. Abigail writes about gender, class, feminism, crime, and the complexities and nuances of assault. Her books Flick, Golden Boy, and Dead Girls have been published in 8 languages and won awards and critical acclaim, as well as loyal and passionate readership amongst women, young and old alike. And Abigail's working on her 4th novel. And to her right is Claire Shaw, who has 3 poetry collections, she's holding one of them, from Blood Axe, often addressing political and personal conflicts. Her poetry is fueled by a strong conviction in the transformative and redemptive power of language. And Claire is also a Royal Literary Fellow and a regular tutor for the Poetry School, the Wordsworth Trust, and the Arvon Foundation. And she's also a mental health trainer activist with a particular interest in self-injury, trauma, and alternative critical mental health narratives. So we're going to be hearing a little bit from each of them. Actually, Claire, do you want to start with like kind of a brief summary of your writing and what you try to do through your poetry, I suppose? Or did I just give it away?
Is this on? Is this on?
You gotta flip the switch.
Is this on?
Yes.
Cool. Oh, I've got the power. I feel like singing or something now. What was the original question?
I don't know. If you want to like summarize kind of your writing, I suppose.
Yeah. So I'm a poet, as Willie said. That's my kind of primary career, but I've also worked in mental health services or for mental health services for years as a mental health trainer. It kind of sounds like 2 separate careers, but isn't, because it's all about language, and it's about language being a kind of place where we give shape to ourselves and other people and our world and our place in it. So it all comes back to me really in a passion for language as the thing that we build ourselves and our lives out of. So a brief summary of my career would be an absolute passion for language and, as Winnie said, a belief that language can kind of save lives or alternatively it can damage people. So a lot of my mental health activism is about that. It's about constructing alternative narratives or opening up narratives, particularly for women and girls who survive sexual violence, so that we can tell our own stories and have our own voices.
And if you didn't hear it from her voice, you've travelled down to Yorkshire for this evening, right?
Have I got an accent?
I think all an accent is there?
There's a woman from Yorkshire over there shouting, no, you mean
And Abigail, do you want to tell us a little bit about this novel, Dead Girls? Because most of your writing is about young people, right?
Yes, most of it's about coming of age, and particularly this book. It was the hardest to write and it's the most personal. It's the first time I've been able to. My books usually use multiple narrators, so I have wrote from the point of view of a woman before, but this entire book is from the point of view of mainly an 11-year-old girl called Thera. And then there's also a slimmer narrative from an older woman that comes in. It's very much personal and very much based on my own childhood in Lincolnshire and how much I loved with a passion my best friend. And we were really affected when we were younger by several murders and kidnappings of young girls, but particularly the Soham murders, because we were 13 when it happened. And we were very much like, we would dress alike, we would wander off into, it was 1999, so it was a really like innocent time, and we would wander away off into our village, and our parents wouldn't know where we were. We didn't have mobile phones, so you just had to kind of chance it back then. But also it was like the 90s and the age of Spice Girls and girl power, and we thought we were sorted, like no one could touch us. And then when that happened, we felt really violated, and it was the beginning, I think, or the first incident of several incidents over the course of my adolescence, where I realised, okay, I'm not just a human being, a human child, I'm a girl. And that doesn't mean just that I can relate to the Spice Girls. It means that there are certain things that are going to be expected of me in my behaviour, and there are certain things that I should, if I'm smart, fear a little bit. And then moving to London at 19 from this tiny village where nobody would have sexually harassed you in the street because you knew where they lived, moving to London, I was living in a ex-council block in Elephant and Castle, and everywhere I came out of my door, I'd have guys like pretending to masturbate to me, or you know, groaning, saying things, and I just became like, I went through like a period of shock and started to hate my own body because they made it feel disgusting and constantly sexual, and it was a sexuality that wasn't mine, and so it was pretty traumatic, and I think I got very angry about that for a while. And then I was saying to you earlier, Winnie, I found like ways to fight back at that by sort of trying out lines to these guys. Like if they'd say, "Hey beautiful, how are you?" I'd be like, "Oh my God, you're so gorgeous, look at your pretty blue eyes." And they'd be like, "Oh Jesus," and get really uncomfortable. And so the book it riffs on those themes of like young female friendship, and also the coming of age of a girl into womanhood, and the book's about an 11-year-old whose best friend is assaulted and killed, and no adult will speak to her about why that is, so she has to work it out for herself. And it's about kind of how we talk to young girls about these themes, and the world that we are letting them enter without really preparing them in any way.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, the reason I kind of put the three of us on the panel is because of that sort of sense of like the stranger danger in a narrative we're all told. And so I haven't actually introduced myself or my book. So this is Dark Chapter. I'm Winnie, and I wrote this book, and it is parts of it is coming of age. I mean, the beginning of the book is actually a coming of age narrative, but largely it goes beyond that, right? Beyond when we've kind of realized that the world is a dangerous place, and it's based on something that happened to me. So 10 years ago, I was walking through a park outside of Belfast, and I was followed by a stranger, and that stranger, it was the middle of the day on a spring afternoon, and that stranger violently assaulted and raped me. But that stranger was a 15-year-old boy. So I had actually met him earlier in the park, but it didn't occur to me he could be dangerous. So I was 29 at the time, and so you couldn't really say it was coming of age, but it was suddenly this realization that like, oh, damn, like sexual violence shit does happen, right? And something that I'd never really thought about was going to happen to me. It did happen to me, and it changed the course of my life, and it led me to doing the work I do now with Clear Lines. But I basically decided I wanted to take that incident, that crime, which changed my life, and tell it from the points of view of both the victim and the perpetrator. So it's fiction because obviously I don't really know my perpetrator, but I tried to imagine what his mindset was like as a 15-year-old boy, and trying to imagine what his upbringing was like that had led him to committing that act of violence against me, which then changed the course of my life.
And can I say, because you can't, because you're leading the panel, but it's an incredibly well-written and generous book it gives really equal time to both Viv, the female character, based on Winnie, and Johnny, the teenage boy, and really talks about why somebody might arrive at this point in their life where they rape someone. And I think that that's really important, because obviously if we don't want it to happen, we're going to have to ask those difficult questions and try and find some empathy for those people.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not, it's difficult to try to feel empathy for rapists, but at the same time, if we're not trying to understand their mindset, as you said, we won't be able to prevent it from happening again. But Claire, you address a lot of these quite difficult issues in your poetry. So I'm going to give you the stage for a few minutes to, I guess, perform a few poems, and then ask you a few questions about that.
Cool. I'm going to read two. Both of the poems I'm going to read is from Off Brom, Head On, which is my second collection. For no particular reason, Straight Ahead, the first collection, and Flood, the third collection, also address themes of sexual violence. But I think this book kind of contains almost like my anthem, if you like, around speaking out, or the act of kind of finding voice, the necessity of finding voice. But I'm going to start with one which is about losing voice, really. And it came from, it's one called Recording Crime, and it was because a few years ago I tried to find the records of my rape as a 10-year-old, and they'd gone, they'd been destroyed, they weren't kept. And that felt really, really strange. And it kind of got me to thinking about how it felt to have lost words and to have been silent for a lot of years. And then to find that there was no record of my story, and it only existed as a story. When the words are taken away, what you're left with is a young man's body over yours, his hands on your mouth like bricks, the bricks of his lips on your mouth. What you're left with is the sun, not caring what he does or doesn't do to you, specifically, whether you die. When the words are all gone, what's left is a brief run-through of your life, unfolding behind your eyes, and how afterwards, not stopping to brush the dust from your legs, you tried to think logically of the next step, which logically was seeking help. When the words are taken away, you're left with a room and a woman who smelt like your mother. How the words you thought you should say weren't what you wanted at all. Not like early that day in the lake, when water meant cold stuff that dazzled your body. Grass smelt yellow, blanket was home, trees were a shade that you walked through, and Claire was your name and meant you. I do not believe in silence. So I guess I'm describing very briefly the experience of losing voice, partly because of the nature of trauma and experiences. Oh, little phone going off. Little awkward moment for somebody there. Not that we're drawing attention to it. I feel bad. The nature of trauma, which is what I was talking about. But also because, like many people, I was directly and indirectly instructed not to talk about what had happened to me. In fact, it was known within my family, many members of my close family didn't even know that it had happened, despite it hitting the media. And my mum used to refer to it as the incident in the churchyard. So there wasn't a name. And this is my response to that. I do not believe in silence. I don't believe in silence because the world is very noisy, and also because the world's full of injustice, and we shouldn't be silent when there's injustice. I do not believe in silence. Because tonight, however I try, I cannot get downstairs without waking my daughter. I do not believe in silence. Because of the War Boys inquiry, because of the 100 plus women he raped, because of the policeman defending the findings, unable to utter the word, this crime, this assault, this category of offence, I do not believe in silence. Because of the stairs and the banisters crack, the sound of the lock and my hand on the door, the 50-tone creak, the magnificent echo of light switch and click. I do not believe in silence. Because of Neda and everyone's sister and the man who said, don't be afraid. For the sake of my daughter, because of the burqa, because of the patter of rain, because of 200,000 years of human history, 45 of them my own, I do not believe in silence. For the sake of my arms, the wrists especially. With respect to my legs and my belly and chest and the comfort long due to my throat. Because of nightclubs at 1 a.m. and shouts in the street and feet in pursuit and shops that don't shut, because of sirens and the dealers downstairs, because of Levy and Matava, because of the blue-lit prisoner, the itch and the scratch of my pen, I believe in the word. I believe in the scrabble of claws and on carpeted floors. I believe in my daughter's complaints. I believe in the violin, the E string, the seesawing bow, the cello straining its throat. I believe in the heart and its beat and its beep and the dance, the trace and the screen. I believe in the volume of colour turned up and my blood, which was always too loud. Because of the nights and the sweats and the same rowdy thoughts, because of that one afternoon when I nailed my own voice to the air, and because there was nobody listening, and through it all, birdsong and the sound of cars passing, I do not believe in silence.
It's a mic drop moment right but I mean, this is why I asked you to come down for this in Yorkshire. But I mean, you know, as a novelist, I'm in awe just of your control of language, right? And just, you know, novelists always look at poets when I was like, God, every single word that you use, like, it's like a pearl drop from heaven. Which is ideally how novelists should be, but we're not. We're just like spewing a bunch of stuff and then we like cut out half of it. But I mean, I guess it's true, it's totally true. But the I mean, the power of those two poems, right? So one is about that silence, and the other one is about not believing in silence and the need to take up the voice. But in between, there is many decades of recovery from the original trauma. And I suppose the thing that strikes me the most about your poetry is that, you know, it's so full of vivid images. And there is this one recurring central image, which is the churchyard in summertime and the sound of birdsong in the air. And I think poetry is ideal because it's allowed to take that one image, which for survivors can be incredibly vivid. Like you'll hear it when I read my section, but you know, we remember all these incredibly vivid details about the scene or the lead up to what happened to us. So I kind of think poetry is ideal for taking the vividness of that imagery and not having to create a plot and not having to create characters about it, but just really emphasizing the power of those particular details. I mean, I guess the question I had is, because something like that happened to you at such a young age, what was the impact on your life in terms of leading you towards poetry, I suppose? Because you know, I'm speaking to somebody who was assaulted at 29, so I kind of had sort of developed me and my forms of self-expression by that point. But what was the impact of that in terms of you becoming a poet?
God. Is there anybody in the audience who's empathising with me trying to answer that?
You're so crushing.
It's a great question. That's a fantastic question, Winnie. Only a novelist could ask that. So long and great. It's funny, even as Winnie was speaking, I was thinking about, so that idea of the single image that can kind of encompass the experience. And when I was raped, it was at the back of a Catholic church called Christ the King, Burnley. And in front of me was this huge brick wall. And I still remember that wall in all of its detail, the wall, very high wall. And I know there will be people in the audience who identify with that. And one of my favourite quotes about the power of poetry comes from one of my favourite writers, Selima Hill. And she says, all poetry is love poetry. She also says, go naked into the shower of truth. I love that image. Well, here I am, naked in the shower of truth, in front of everyone. But all poetry is love poetry, and that idea that we have to love the world in order to write about it, we have to be fully present in it. And as Winnie was speaking about the churchyard and the birdsong and the air, and I thought that sounds really beautiful, and I was thinking of the wall, and I thought, that's my fucking wall. You know, I earned that wall. I'm going to write about that bloody wall. So I couldn't do, I don't think, what Winnie's done and write about my perpetrator at 10, my rapist. But I can write about that fucking wall, and it can stand for all of it. Sorry about the language. I'll apologise now, there'll be more of it. But the idea of poetry is in lots of ways, I think, a natural language for really difficult experience, and particularly for traumatic experience, and for experiences that aren't stored in a kind of rational or chronological narrative. Hello. Hiya. It's fine. Cheers. Yeah, the experiences that are laid down in sensory details that kind of may have well, you know, because of our age or because the nature of the experience or the resources that we had to draw on, have surpassed our capacity to store them in language. We store them in sensory impression, and that's a lot of how poetry works in sensory detail. And it doesn't have to be chronological, it doesn't have to be rational, it can be contradictory. It's better if it is. Let's have a bit of everything. So I think in many ways poetry is the, well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But Winnie's given me permission. It's kind of the natural vehicle for experiences as challenging as that. And did I come through it because I was so young? Well, I grew up, I was the youngest of 6 in a single parent family, growing up in Burnley in the 1980s. I grew up in a household that was really dangerous, really neglectful, really abusive. So I can't speak from experience of what it was like not to be abused from a very early age onwards. But what I do know is that words have always been my medium, and I feel so lucky that I did have words. We all have our medium, and we should find it and celebrate it. And whether I came to words with the passion I did because of my experiences, I guess I don't know. What I do know is that for years I didn't have words. You know, my vocabulary was extensive. I did once see a cognitive behavioural therapist in my 30s, and his kind of diagnosis was the trouble with ukulele is you can't express yourself. And I said, Philip, I've just had my first book out, Critical Acclaim. He said, poetry's a different matter. He put me off CBT for quite some time. But yeah, people speak other languages, you know, and for kind of 10 years, I spoke the language of self-injury because I didn't have the words to express how I felt. And the languages that we speak with our bodies, or the languages that we speak with our silence, or through our behaviours, through addiction, through cutting ourselves, they can be incredibly articulate too. So although we're here to kind of celebrate language and literature and the word hooray, 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 I love them with all my heart, I also think that to truly love language, we also have to remember that language isn't just about the word, and to kind of celebrate the speaking of experiences of sexual assault and sexual violence in language. We need to remember that other people are speaking other languages too, and our responsibility is not just to speak but to listen. I think I've answered that question.
Yeah, that was adequate. I'm gonna have to move on to Abigail, only because, I mean, obviously there is a link here because, I mean, Claire, you said that you were 10 years old when your trauma happened, and Abigail, the story at the heart of yours, at the heart of your novel is something that happens to an 11-year-old girl, and there is something very much about growing up and being young as a girl, and the either quite harsh kind of coming of age, shattering of our understanding of the world that happens through trauma, or the more gradual kind of coming of age that can happen to us if we haven't experienced trauma at such a young age. Do you want to read a little bit from your book, and then I'll ask you a question?
Just listening to Claire's and thinking like, oh my god, I've got to follow that. So this is from about 80 pages into the book. It is trailered in the synopsis, so I'm not giving anything away. But Thea's friend Billy has gone missing, and Thea, being the resourceful, intelligent girl of the 90s that she is, has decided that the police are struggling because they don't know as much as she does. She's her best friend, so she goes looking for Billy, and she takes her brother Sam, and this is from that sort of journey. The copse on the farmland is a bit of land that anybody can go in. It's not owned by anyone. It has a small pond with a bird hide and trees all around it. Our den is at the back of it, just next to the caravan park on the other side, but no one knows about it because it's surrounded by trees. It looks overgrown like an enormous bush. If Billy was scared, I explained to Sam, she would have run to the nearest place she could hide. The den, Sam exclaims. That's right, I say. Wait, Thea, what about the black dog? He says worriedly. Sam doesn't like the woods. He's scared of lots of things. E.T., boys that are bigger than him, and what's under our beds. Sometimes I'm scared of what's under the bed, but I have to be brave for Sam. Do you want to wait here while I go in? I suggest. No, he protests. I'm fine, I'm not a baby. Stay quiet then, I tell him. Low hedgerows surround us as we walk from the sea of golden wheat and barley towards the mass of green. Suddenly, Sam stops. There are the gates open. I hesitate. Well, maybe somebody just left it like that. You're not supposed to leave the gate open, the sign says. We exchange a look. I'm still going in, Sam, I say. Maybe she's hurt. Maybe she can't walk. I turn and leave him picking his fingernails on the other side of the gate. I only have to keep walking a minute until I hear footsteps running up behind me. I take his hand. We walk around the pond, poking our heads in the hide just to check Billy isn't there. We reach the back of the copse, where the trees are closer together and it's darkest. This is where our secret den is. The den where we took the Ouija board. The den where we saw the dogs. It's made of a natural circle of trees that a bunch of vines and ivy have grown over, so you basically can't see inside. We've been making it better and better by pulling the vines into the spaces where you could once see in, so there really aren't any now. Hattie's sister showed us how to do it, and she got showed by an even older girl who's now 18, so it's been around for a really long time. To get into the den, you have to crawl under a thicket of bracken. We go up to the entrance, and Sam points. What? Hair, he says simply. I peer closer to the brambles where he's pointing. There is hair there, several strands of long golden hair. That's Billy's hair, I say. She's here. Maybe she left it here when we did the Ouija board on Friday. I frown and squat down in front of the entrance. Billy? No reply. Billy! I get down on my belly to call through. I'm staying here, Sam says. I look up at him. Okay, if you see anyone, scream and I'll come and get you. Sam gulps. Okay. He turns his back on me. I leave him there, peering down the path, left to right and over again. I duck down and stretch my arms ahead of me and crawl on my hands and knees through the thicket. The thorns tug on my hair and my knees get cold in the dirt, which is always cold even in July. When I get through to the other side, I stand up and dust myself off. As I walk into the clearing, I keep my eyes to the ground, scanning back and forth for something that might indicate Billy's presence. Just past the entrance, the grass is flattened and ripped up a little. Half a muddy footprint has been left, even after last night's storm. It's bigger than mine, but not by much. I avoid the footprint, treading lightly on the dirt. The trees here are all deciduous, so they have wide leaves, not like pines and most evergreens. My dad knows all the names, so I know them too. In autumn, all the leaves will be gone, but right now the ground under the trees is shielded from the sun by lots of leaves and branches, so it's still damp from the storm. The leaves knit together above me, and the light coming through them makes everything green and eerie. It's quite dark. I am focusing on small details, on what is in front of me. It's like I'm too nervous to look around. It's like I know there might be something I don't want to see. The breaths I take are small, but they sound loud to me. I don't have to walk far in before I stop, realising. There is a ditch that runs along one side of the clearing that makes up the den. The water is higher than usual where I cross it, just past the entrance. There is too much water. I follow the line of the ditch, and now I notice the thing that is damming up the water. The shape is to my right. It's a long lump covered in a dirty white or maybe cream cloth. It comes into focus as I turn towards it. My breathing is getting quicker. I hear a crack in the undergrowth that makes me jump, and I look around wildly, but I can't see anything. So I inch towards the shape. The cloth is a sheet. The lump is a human. My lips start to tremble. Tears come into my eyes, but they don't fall. I keep my eyes wide to stop myself from crying, and I look around, then back at the lump. Billy, I whisper. Billy. Vera? Sam calls from the other side of the bracken. Is she there? Have you found her? Billy? I force myself to move towards the shape. I tell myself Billy is my best true forever friend, and I have to be strong for her. I have to find out. I crack and sob suddenly, then smack my hand over my mouth. But maybe it's not her. It's not her at all, it's someone else. Or it is her and she's alive, and I found her just in time, and Sam runs to get the police, and they come climbing into the den through the back, and the ambulance arrives just as she wakes up, and everyone's so relieved that I saved her, and Billy is saying, That Walker man said he was going to kill me, but I knew Thera would find me if I concentrated on sending her messages with my mind. Indubitably. Phew. And I will say, that's what friends are for, and just smile knowingly. It'll be such a relief, and everyone will think I'm a hero. I better rescue her now then, but I still can't move. If she's alive, you have to rescue her, I tell myself in my head. Look, she's laying on her back, so she won't be drowned. My legs feel weak and rubbery, but I step carefully towards the top of the lump. The slight crook in the last third of the fabric is the shape of Billy's knees, the way her legs always bend. That seems a thing that wouldn't be personal, but I would recognise that bend anywhere. Billy's pointy elf ear is sticking out from underneath the cloth, the hair swept back from it like it always sweeps back. There is Billy's one freckle. I haven't noticed myself noticing these things before, but it's funny how I know them so well. If you showed me any inch of skin or hair or even a tooth, I could tell you if it was Billy's. I lean over her. Holding my breath, I move my hand towards Billy's face. And as I do, I notice our friendship bracelet on my wrist. I wear mine on the left, Billy on the right. I hesitate for a second. Some weird thing in my head rationalises that if I don't pull it back, life will go on as it always has, and Billy being missing will all have been a big mistake. It's a weird image, I know. This little 11-year-old, 4 feet 11 inches tall, 6 stone 2 pounds, reaching out for a body in a ditch with an intense, slightly crazed look in her eye. I think I probably knew she was dead. I was never someone you'd call stupid. I just didn't want it to be true. It was 1999, the precipice of a millennium, and I was 11. My name was Thera the Wild. Thera Wild. Thera but Wild. That's what my first name meant. Wild, and my last name too. My mum had picked Thera and made me double wild, intending it to mean something for me. I think about what it is to be wild a lot. To be wild is to be brave and sometimes savage. Right then, I was neither of those things. But I think the terror of finding Billy entered my blood, and it would precipitate everything that followed.
Thanks, Abigail. Abby, and I suppose what's so striking about your book is that obviously at its heart there's quite a dark story there. 11-year-old girl is raped and murdered, and her best friend has to kind of confront that in a very kind of visual way there. But what I also found quite so engaging and so engrossing about your book is that 11-year-old kind of voice. And on one hand, it's 1999 and she's 11, so she loves the Spice Girls and Leonardo DiCaprio, but then she is starting to learn about the world out there and about the violence that can be done to girls. So I was just wondering what prompted you to, I guess, write from such a particular and such an engaging voice?
Well, I think we're often really afraid to talk about the things that happen to children and bring children's voices and children into it. And so something that Thera really struggles with in the book is that no adult will really tell her what's going on. But she's the one who's affected by this, and she's the one who has to figure it out, and she's the one that's lost, at this moment, the kind of love of her life. It was really important for me, if I was going to tell a story about paedophilia, that it would be from the point of view of one of the little girls. And there's a bit in the book where Billy has a memorial, and Thera is saying, all of the adults are saying how much of an angel that Billy was, and she hadn't really begun her life yet. But Thera says, she wasn't an angel. She was like naughty and funny and cheeky, and she was my friend, and she didn't deserve to die. And it's not about her being so pure that she didn't deserve to have this thing happen to her. And I think that purity really comes up when you talk about violence against women
Sorry, I just feel moved to enter that moment, I need to say.
So I wanted to write about two little girls who weren't angels and don't deserve to be killed.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, no one's an angel, and there is that kind of media desire to portray the victim as being really innocent and also having no agency. And what's so interesting about your book, and I think for anyone who's a survivor who's experienced something like that, the fact is we aren't completely helpless victims, right? Claire has managed to write some pretty amazing poetry despite what happened to her, and I think survivors actually have, we have the life experience, that enables us to understand how to make the changes in our society to handle these issues better. But then also we do have the capacity, the creative capacity to write poetry or to make movies or what have you, and the ability to create that activism for change that's needed. So I think it's and I suppose that's how we are trying to change a narrative. Instead of presenting victims of violence against women and girls who've experienced this as being, as being helpless and passive, actually it's about celebrating that agency.
Survivors rather than victims.
Yeah. And that is a nice handy kind of intro to my book, which is actually dedicated to all the victims and all the survivors, and most of us who are somewhere in between, because we are all somewhere, I mean, those of us who've been through that experience, we are somewhere in between both of those words, and neither of the words is really, perfect. And so I guess my book, everyone's been talking about how I write from the perpetrator's perspective, but I don't ever read from the perpetrator's perspective, because I can never actually get his voice properly if I was actually reading it out. So I am going to read the prologue, and unlike Abigail's book is entirely in first person, there's only two sections which are in first person in the book, and this is the beginning, and it's obviously not the voice of the perpetrator. They say events like this change your life forever, that your life will never be the same as it was the day before it happened, or even 2 hours before it happened, when I stood waiting for that bus out of Belfast, along the Falls Road to the west of the city. Is it melodramatic to think of life like that, of a clean split struck straight down the breadth of your existence, severing your first 29 years from all the years that come after? I look across that gap now, an unexpected rift in the contour of my life, and I long to shout across that ravine to the younger me, who stands on the opposite edge, oblivious to what lies ahead. She is a distant speck. She seems lost from my perspective, but in her mind, she thinks she knows where she's going. There's a hiking guidebook in her hand and a path that she is following. It will lead here, up this slope, and then along the edge of a plateau to gain the higher ground, merging with the hills above the city. She does not know who follows her. She's only thinking of the path ahead. But some things she cannot anticipate. I stand now on this side of the ravine, desperate to warn my earlier self of the person trailing her, skulking from bush to tree in her wake. Stop, I want to shout. It's not worth it. Just give up the trail and go home. But she wouldn't listen anyway. She's too stubborn, too determined to hike this trail on a day this crisp and clear. And now, it's too late. She's in isolated country, and even if she were to turn back, she would inevitably encounter him, because he is behind her, watching her. By now, she's traversed the slope and found the trail that runs between a sunlit pasture and the steep incline of the glen. She pauses for a moment, breathing in the beauty of this green track, the tree branches arching over the path, the bright field that stretches to her left. She's escaped the city. This is where the countryside really begins. It seems like a little bit of heaven for one last peaceful moment. But she's perched on the edge, and to her right, the ground plunges sharply into the ravine. The river below is a distant roar. The air up here smells of manure and sun and warm grass, and lazy insects drift in the filtered light beneath the trees. And then, glancing down the wooded chasm to her right, she sees a figure coming up the slope, trying to hide in the brush of the forest. Something skips unnaturally in the beat of her heart. Only then does she realize she's being followed. Now, years later, it is as if I am the one following my earlier self, haunting her every step like some guardian angel arrived too late. She parts the branches in front of her, and I do it too, invisibly. She quickens her pace to lengthen the distance between them, and I fall in step. She instinctively knows she must reach the open ground before he catches her, so she tries to cover the last few yards of the path as it clears a ridge. With an invisible hand, I want to hold back the little bastard, lock him into position like a rugby player, while shouting to her to keep on going, to reach the meadow, and then abandon the trail, to forget about the hike, just head straight to the busy road and go home. But I'm powerless to stop it. Events must unfold as they already have. The past is our past, so I am stranded here on this side of the ravine, watching as he catches up to her. I don't want to see the rest of it. I've replayed it enough times already. If I could just freeze it there in that final moment, perched between the sunlit pasture and the plunging abyss, then everything would still be fine. Only then it would not be my life. It would be someone else's pleasant stroll through the Irish countryside on a spring afternoon. But my journey turned out to be a little different. was 29 when that happened, but, you know, at the same time, there was very much a sense of, like, you know, until then I'd been, and I still am, I suppose, but, like, you know, a quite tenacious person, somebody who, like Thera, was really strong-willed and curious about the world, and always saw herself as somebody having agency, and then suddenly to have that kind of violence happen to you, where you're basically just a body for someone to do something with, it was that sudden kind of, like, forcing of victimhood upon you, and the struggle of recovery afterwards is to realize, like, okay, this has happened to me, but then how do I reclaim that sense of agency I had before? And it is a very long journey, and I mean, and it takes years and decades a lot of times. So I guess that was what I was trying to look at in that particular passage, was that sense of regret that so many of us have about the moment just before the trauma, and like, why didn't I do this differently? Why didn't I do that differently? Why did I have to go on that hike on that particular afternoon? And that's how we're trying to make sense of something, but the fact is you can't make sense of that kind of violence. I mean, unless we're willing to look at, you know, the roots of the perpetrator and why they're doing that. But for a victim and for a survivor, it is completely senseless what's happened to us.